Behind the glittering lights of Nashville and the roaring applause of packed honky tonks, many country music legends carried a darker truth. They were drunk almost all the time. For some, alcohol became a trademark of their outlaw image. For others, it dragged them into scandal, heartbreak, and even an early grave. In this video, we uncover 30 country music stars whose lives and legacies were forever marked by whiskey, wild nights, and self-destruction. Hank Williams Sr. Few names in country music carry the same mythical weight as Hank Williams Sr. Born in 1923 in Alabama, Hank rose to stardom with his raw, aching voice and unforgettable hits like Your Cheating Heart and I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry. He defined what country music was and set the standard for all who followed. On stage, he was a charismatic force, a man whose words seemed to come straight from the soul of the American South. But offstage, another force had its grip on him: alcohol. Hank's problems with drinking started young. His fragile health, marked by spina bifida occulta, left him in constant pain, and whiskey became his medicine of choice. As his fame soared, so did his reliance on the bottle. By the late 1940s, it wasn't unusual for Hank to show up to concerts drunk, or not show up at all. Promoters began to worry. His bandmates grew frustrated. Fans sometimes watched him stumble through sets, his once perfect timing slipping away in a haze of liquor. Behind the scenes, the toll was even greater. His marriage to Audrey Williams crumbled under the weight of his drinking and womanizing. Nashville insiders whispered about his reckless behavior, and the Grand Ole Opry, once his biggest stage, eventually banned him because of his alcohol-fueled unreliability. Still, Hank seemed unable or unwilling to stop. Whiskey was both his escape and his cage. The end came tragically fast. On January 1st, 1953, at only 29 years old, Hank Williams was found dead in the backseat of a Cadillac. Officially, heart failure was to blame, but years of alcohol abuse had weakened his body far beyond repair. He left behind a string of timeless songs and a legend built as much on his drinking as on his music. To this day, Hank Williams Sr. is remembered not only as the father of modern country music, but also as a cautionary tale. His genius burned too brightly, too briefly, consumed by the bottle that seemed always within reach. George Jones. If Hank Williams Sr. was the tragic pioneer, then George Jones became the living embodiment of alcohol's grip on country music. Born in 1931 in Saratoga, Texas, Jones possessed one of the most distinctive voices in the genre: rich, emotional, and hauntingly pure. Songs like He Stopped Loving Her Today cemented his place as perhaps the greatest country singer of all time. Yet, behind that golden voice lay decades of turmoil, fueled almost entirely by alcohol. Jones's drinking wasn't casual, it was legendary. Nashville insiders dubbed him No-Show Jones because he missed so many concerts while on benders. Fans would buy tickets, only to learn he hadn't even shown up to the venue. In interviews, Jones later admitted that sometimes he was too drunk to even remember he had a performance scheduled. The nickname stuck, haunting him throughout his career, but strangely also adding to his outlaw mystique. His marriages bore the brunt of his drinking, most famously his turbulent relationship with Tammy Wynette. The couple became country's golden duo on stage, but a battlefield at home. Wynette's autobiography detailed terrifying nights when Jones, in a drunken rage, would chase her through the house. There was even the infamous story of Jones riding a lawnmower into town to buy liquor after Wynette had taken away his car keys. It was both comical and tragic, capturing just how far alcohol had taken hold of him. Professionally, his career was constantly in jeopardy. Labels grew wary, managers exasperated. Yet, somehow, when George Jones stepped into a recording booth, the magic returned. Even at his lowest, his voice carried the raw ache of a man drowning in his own demons. That paradox, personal chaos feeding artistic brilliance, only deepened his legend. In later years, Jones finally managed to tame his drinking, spurred by his marriage to Nancy Sepulvado, who stood by him through his darkest battles. Still, the scars remained. His reputation as the greatest country singer who nearly destroyed himself with alcohol became part of the George Jones mythos. When Jones died in 2013, tributes poured in, celebrating the man who gave country its most heartbreaking ballad and its most infamous scandals. He remains a towering reminder that brilliance and self-destruction often walk hand in hand. Johnny Paycheck. If there was ever a country star who wore his self-destruction like a badge of honor, it was Johnny Paycheck. Born Donald Eugene Lytle in 1938, Paycheck clawed his way up from poverty to stardom with grit, swagger, and a voice that dripped with rebellion. His 1977 anthem, Take This Job and Shove It, became a rallying cry for the working class, cementing his place in country's outlaw movement. But while the song spoke of defiance in the workplace, Paycheck's real battles were fought in dimly lit bars, backstage dressing rooms, and prison cells, almost always with a bottle in his hand. Paycheck's drinking was relentless. Fellow musicians recalled that he could rarely be found sober, often staggering onto stages, his performances unpredictable. While audiences loved the danger he exuded, promoters dreaded it. One night he'd deliver a blistering set. The next, he'd barely manage to finish a song before collapsing into incoherence. His outlaw image thrived on the chaos, but it slowly consumed the man behind it. Alcohol fueled not only his career, but also his violent temper. In 1985, Paycheck's demons boiled over when, during a drunken barroom argument, he shot a man in the head with a pistol. The victim survived, but Paycheck was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 9 years in prison. Though he served less time, the incident crystallized the public's image of him as a dangerous, booze-soaked outlaw who lived every lyric of his songs. Financial ruin followed. Despite selling millions of records, Paycheck squandered his fortune on alcohol, drugs, and legal troubles. Bankruptcy stripped him of nearly everything, and at one point, he owed the IRS over $1 million. Friends and fellow artists occasionally rallied to his aid, but Paycheck seemed incapable of staying on the straight and narrow. Yet, even as his life spiraled, his music retained a raw authenticity. He wasn't just singing about hardship and whiskey-soaked nights, he was living them. For fans, that grit made him unforgettable. For the industry, it made him a liability. Johnny Paycheck died in 2003 at the age of 64, worn down by years of drinking and hard living. In death, as in life, he remained a symbol of country music's outlaw spirit, dangerous, unpredictable, and unapologetically drunk. His story is a reminder that sometimes the line between myth and man is blurred by the bottom of a bottle. Merle Haggard. Among the giants of country music, Merle Haggard stands tall as both a voice of the people and a symbol of outlaw rebellion. Born in 1937 in Oildale, California, Haggard's early life was marred by poverty and crime. He spent time in prison before music gave him a second chance. Rising from inmate to icon, his songs like Okie from Muskogee and Mama Tried captured the struggles and pride of working-class America. Yet behind his poetic lyrics and rugged charm, Haggard carried a long, complicated relationship with alcohol that haunted him for decades. Haggard was never shy about his drinking. He admitted in interviews that booze was both a crutch and a curse throughout his career. Nights on the road often blurred together in a haze of beer and whiskey. Bandmates told stories of him polishing off bottles before walking on stage, sometimes fueled, sometimes impaired. Alcohol was part of his outlaw persona. Merle wasn't just singing about honky-tonk heartbreak. He was living it. His turbulent personal life reflected the chaos. Haggard was married 5 times, and alcohol often played a role in the breakdowns of those relationships. He could be charming and magnetic, then reckless and destructive when drunk. Nashville insiders knew to tread carefully. When the bottle was in his hand, Merle was unpredictable. Still, his honesty about his demons endeared him to fans who saw him as authentic, a man who bared his scars through his songs. The toll on his health was significant. Alongside drinking, Haggard battled substance abuse and lived hard on the road. In later years, he struggled with lung problems, made worse by decades of excess. Yet he never abandoned the stage for long. Even when weakened, he performed with a defiant energy that reminded audiences why he was a legend. In many ways, Merle Haggard's legacy is inseparable from his vices. Alcohol colored his music with a rawness that polished stars could never replicate. His voice carried the weary grit of someone who had lived every word he sang, through prison, heartbreak, and whiskey-stained nights. When Merle passed in 2016 on his 79th birthday, tributes poured in, not just for his songs, but for his authenticity. Fans remembered him as the ultimate outlaw, flawed, scarred, but real. His story is a testament to how alcohol both fueled and fractured the soul of a man who gave country music some of its greatest anthems. Few country stars embody the tragedy of alcohol like Keith Whitley. Born in 1955 in Sandy Hook, Kentucky, Whitley grew up immersed in bluegrass before transitioning into mainstream country. His voice was smooth yet aching, blending tradition with raw emotion. By the mid-1980s, songs like Don't Close Your Eyes and When You Say Nothing at All had made him one of Nashville's brightest rising stars. Industry insiders believed he would define country music for decades to come. But Keith carried a silent shadow with him everywhere, a crippling addiction to alcohol. Whitley's drinking wasn't just heavy, it was destructive. Friends and bandmates recalled countless nights where he seemed unable to stop, often downing entire bottles in a single sitting. Despite his growing fame, he frequently missed commitments, canceled shows, or appeared visibly intoxicated during performances. The duality was heartbreaking. On stage, his voice carried an almost perfect sadness, but offstage, alcohol was quietly pulling him under. His marriage to fellow country singer Lori Morgan was both a source of joy and struggle. Morgan later shared that she tried desperately to help him quit, pleading with him to seek treatment. But Whitley's relationship with alcohol ran deep, intertwined with his creativity and self-destructive tendencies. Despite his young age, the wear of drinking was already showing in his health, his behavior, and his reputation within Nashville. On May 9, 1989, tragedy struck. Keith Whitley was found dead in his Nashville home at just 34 years old. The cause? Acute alcohol poisoning, with a blood alcohol content nearly 6 times the legal driving limit. His death stunned the industry. One of the most promising voices of a generation was silenced before his career had truly reached its peak. The irony is bitter. Many fans only discovered Whitley's brilliance after his passing, his posthumous influence helping shape the new traditionalist wave of country in the 1990s. His songs remain classics, still covered and cherished today, serving as a reminder of what could have been. Keith Whitley's story is perhaps the starkest example of alcohol's devastating cost in country music. He had the talent to rival legends, but the bottle claimed him before he could secure that legacy. In the end, his life stands as both a warning and a heartbreaking what if in the history of country music. Waylon Jennings. When you think of the outlaw country movement, Waylon Jennings is one of the first names that comes to mind. Born in 1937 in Littlefield, Texas, Waylon carved out a career that defied Nashville's polished rules, giving fans gritty anthems like Luckenbach, Texas, and Good-Hearted Woman. His partnership with Willie Nelson, Chris Christopherson, and Johnny Cash as part of the Highwaymen cemented him as a rebel hero. But behind the tough exterior and gravelly voice was a man wrestling with decades of heavy drinking, drug abuse, and the toll it took on his body and soul. For Jennings, alcohol wasn't just a pastime. It was part of the outlaw identity. He often drank through recording sessions, interviews, and long nights on the road. Whiskey and beer became props that reinforced his image, but they also fueled a lifestyle that veered dangerously out of control. Combined with his notorious cocaine habit, Jennings's drinking turned him into a figure both admired for his rebelliousness and pitied for his self-destruction. Those closest to him bore the brunt of his choices. His marriages suffered from his drinking and drug use, and his reputation in Nashville grew complicated. On one hand, fans loved his authenticity. On the other, industry insiders worried whether he would even show up sober enough to perform. Yet somehow, when Jennings stepped on stage or into a studio, he delivered. His booming baritone and commanding presence rarely faltered, even if his personal life was falling apart. By the 1980s, years of abuse began catching up with him. He was diagnosed with diabetes, his health steadily declined, and he eventually gave up cocaine and slowed down on alcohol. Still, the damage was done. His later years were plagued by complications, and in 2002, Jennings passed away at 64. Waylon Jennings' legacy remains twofold. He was the outlaw who broke Nashville's stranglehold on creativity, giving country music some of its greatest and most authentic songs. But he was also a cautionary tale of how a lifestyle fueled by alcohol and excess can strip years from even the strongest legends. Fans remember him as a man who lived and drank on his own terms until the very end. Hank Williams Jr. Carrying the surname Hank Williams Jr. was both a blessing and a curse. Born in 1949, the son of the legendary Hank Williams Sr., he inherited not only a powerful musical legacy, but also many of the same demons. From a young age, Bocephus, as he was nicknamed, was thrust into the spotlight, expected to live up to his father's towering reputation. While he eventually forged his own path with a rowdy, southern rock-infused brand of country, alcohol became a constant presence in his life, sometimes fueling his outlaw persona, other times nearly destroying it. Williams Jr. embraced the hard-living image early on. Whiskey, women, and wild nights weren't just rumors. They were part of his identity. His songs often celebrated drinking culture, with anthems like Whiskey Bent and Hellbound and Family Tradition becoming staples for fans who saw him as a symbol of rebellion. On stage, a bottle of Jack Daniels was as much a part of the show as his guitar. Fans loved the authenticity. He wasn't just singing about booze, he was living it. But behind the rowdy image lay serious consequences. His binge drinking often led to violent outbursts, reckless decisions, and strained relationships. Friends and collaborators described times when he seemed perpetually drunk, making recording sessions and tours unpredictable. His 1975 near-fatal fall from a Montana mountain, though not directly caused by alcohol, highlighted the reckless, risk-taking lifestyle that often went hand-in-hand with heavy drinking. Recovering from that accident required multiple reconstructive surgeries, yet it didn't slow his reliance on booze. As years passed, Hank Jr. became both a country superstar and a lightning rod for controversy. His drinking fed into his reputation as a larger-than-life outlaw. But it also added fuel to scandals and public incidents that threatened to overshadow his music. Still, his raw talent and ability to connect with working-class fans kept him at the forefront of the genre. Today, Hank Williams Jr. is remembered as both an heir to a legend and an icon in his own right. His legacy is complicated. He carried his father's torch, but also repeated many of his father's mistakes, especially when it came to alcohol. For his fans, though, the drinking, the rowdiness, and the rebellion are inseparable from the man himself. Hank Jr. remains proof that sometimes country music's greatest stars shine brightest when they live as wildly as the songs they sing. George Strait. When fans think of George Strait, the king of country, they picture a polished cowboy in a crisp hat, standing tall with a calm confidence. Born in 1952 in Poteet, Texas, Strait built a reputation as one of the most consistent and respected artists in country music history. With over 60 #1 hits, he avoided most of the scandals that plagued his peers. Yet, even George Strait's story has a lesser-known side. In his younger days, alcohol played a significant role in shaping his lifestyle and image. Strait's early years in the honky-tonk circuit were filled with long nights, smoky bars, and endless rounds of drinks. Like many aspiring country musicians, alcohol was woven into the culture. Fans wanted to buy shots for the band, and performers often used whiskey to keep the energy flowing. For Strait, drinking was less about rebellion and more about blending into the rowdy world of Texas dance halls. Stories circulated of him and his band closing down bars, the night ending in haze and laughter. Unlike Hank Williams Jr. or George Jones, Strait never let alcohol derail his career. He showed up, delivered, and kept his reputation intact. But insiders knew the whiskey-soaked nights were part of the package during his rise. Friends have mentioned that he could hold his liquor impressively, a quiet toughness that matched his stoic stage presence. Drinking was part of his offstage persona, even if he kept it far from the headlines. As Strait's career skyrocketed in the 1980s and 1990s, he distanced himself from the hard-drinking cowboy lifestyle, focusing instead on discipline and professionalism. The tragic loss of his daughter in 1986 also shifted his priorities, pushing him toward a more private, controlled life. Still, the rowdy, beer and whiskey-fueled years of his early career linger in the background, a reminder that even the most polished legends had their wild phases. Today, George Strait stands as a rare example of a country star who touched the edge of alcohol-fueled culture without falling completely into its grasp. For fans, that balance makes his legacy even more remarkable. He lived the honky-tonk life, but he also rose above it, proving that discipline and restraint can coexist with authenticity. Few artists leaned into the image of beer, whiskey, and rowdy nights quite like Toby Keith. Born in 1961 in Clinton, Oklahoma, Keith rose to fame in the 1990s with his booming voice, patriotic anthems, and larger-than-life personality. Hits like Should Have Been a Cowboy established him as a country superstar, but it was his drinking-themed songs, I Love This Bar, Beer for My Horses, and Red Solo Cup, that cemented his reputation as one of Nashville's ultimate party kings. Behind the music, Toby Keith wasn't just singing about alcohol. It was part of the lifestyle he embraced and projected. Keith made no secret of his fondness for drinking. Interviews often revealed his love for whiskey and beer, and fans expected to see that side of him on stage. His concerts were notorious for their high-energy, booze-soaked atmosphere. Red Solo Cups weren't just props. They were symbols of his brand, embodying the carefree, hard-drinking spirit he represented. For many, Toby Keith became the face of a generation that celebrated drinking culture as central to country music. But Keith's heavy drinking wasn't without consequences. Industry insiders often remarked on his fiery temper, which alcohol sometimes inflamed. He clashed with other artists, executives, and even journalists, earning a reputation as a man who would speak or shout his mind after a few too many drinks. His rowdy public image was both his strength and his weakness. Fans loved his authenticity, while critics accused him of glorifying excess. In later years, Keith faced serious health struggles. In 2022, he publicly announced a battle with stomach cancer, shocking fans around the world. While he did not directly link his illness to alcohol, his decades of hard living cast a long shadow over his health. Still, he continued to project resilience, embodying the tough, unfiltered cowboy spirit that defined his career. Toby Keith's legacy is tied as much to whiskey and beer as it is to chart-topping hits. For some, he represents the ultimate celebration of country's drinking culture. For others, he is a cautionary tale of how deeply that culture can consume an artist's image. Either way, Keith remains unforgettable, a larger-than-life star who built his empire with a bottle in hand and a song on his lips. Glen Campbell. To the world, Glen Campbell was the golden boy of country and pop crossover. Born in 1936 in Arkansas, Campbell rose from poverty to become one of the most versatile entertainers of his generation. With timeless hits like Rhinestone Cowboy and Wichita Lineman, and a television presence through the Glen Campbell Good Time Hour, he projected the image of a clean-cut superstar. But behind the glittering smile and flawless guitar licks, Campbell battled a storm that threatened to undo everything, a crippling addiction to alcohol. Campbell's drinking habits became well known in Nashville and Hollywood alike. At first, alcohol seemed like just part of the showbiz lifestyle. Cocktail parties, late-night sessions, celebratory toasts. But over time, his reliance deepened. Friends and colleagues recalled times when he would show up to the studio smelling of booze, his charm dimmed by slurred speech and volatile moods. The polished cowboy image began to crack under the weight of drunken outbursts and unpredictable behavior. His personal life suffered immensely. Campbell went through 4 marriages, with alcohol playing a major role in the destruction of at least 2 of them. His high-profile relationship with singer Tanya Tucker was notorious for its volatility, fueled by heavy drinking and fights that spilled into the tabloids. The same man who could mesmerize millions with a guitar in hand could turn angry, reckless, and self-destructive once alcohol took hold. The law eventually intervened. In the 2000s, Campbell was arrested for drunk driving and hit-and-run charges, incidents that embarrassed the country community and confirmed long-whispered rumors about his dependency. Even then, his charm never completely vanished. Many fans forgave him, chalking it up to the demons that so many stars carried behind the stage lights. Remarkably, Campbell experienced moments of redemption. He sought treatment, leaned on his faith, and continued to perform, even as his battles with alcohol left lasting scars. Later in life, when he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, the focus shifted away from his drinking to his courageous final tours, where he performed despite memory loss. Still, the legacy of his alcohol struggles lingers, an undeniable chapter in his life story. Glen Campbell remains an American icon, celebrated for bridging the gap between country and pop. Yet his story is also a cautionary tale. Behind the rhinestones and television smiles, he was a man undone time and again by alcohol. His triumphs are brighter because of his talent, but his falls are darker because of the bottle that followed him everywhere. David Allan Coe. Few artists embody the wild, dangerous edge of outlaw country like David Allan Coe. Born in 1939 in Akron, Ohio, Coe lived a life that was as controversial as it was colorful. Before he even became a musician, he spent years in reform schools and prisons, developing a hardened persona that he later transformed into a music career. With songs like You Never Even Called Me by My Name and The Ride, Coe cemented his reputation as one of the most provocative voices in country. But with that notoriety came a lifestyle steeped in alcohol, drugs, and rebellion that defined much of his career. Drinking was inseparable from Coe's image. He was the outlaw among outlaws, often arriving at gigs already drunk, his long hair and leather-clad figure making him stand out in the conservative Nashville scene. Fans who came to see him expected chaos, and Coe rarely disappointed. Whiskey-fueled rants, unpredictable performances, and backstage brawls became part of the legend. For him, alcohol wasn't just a vice. It was part of the theater of being David Allan Coe. His personal life mirrored the turbulence of his stage persona. Marriages crumbled under the weight of constant drinking, and friends often distanced themselves from his volatility. Many insiders described Coe as a man impossible to control, someone who lived on the edge of self-destruction. Yet this very unpredictability attracted a loyal cult following that celebrated his refusal to play by Nashville's rules. Alcohol also amplified his reputation as one of country music's most controversial figures. Beyond his drinking, Coe often courted outrage with explicit songs, offensive lyrics, and public feuds. Critics dismissed him as reckless, while fans praised him for authenticity. Either way, his drunken bravado only made the controversies burn hotter. Despite the chaos, Coe remained a prolific songwriter. His best works carried a raw honesty that only someone living in whiskey-soaked darkness could capture. Songs about outlaws, heartbreak, and rebellion weren't abstract. They were the soundtrack of his own self-inflicted struggles. Now in his 80s, Coe has slowed down, his hard-living days behind him, but the reputation remains. For many, he is remembered less for his chart success and more for his persona. A whiskey-soaked rebel who lived as though every night might be his last. David Allan Coe's story is a reminder that alcohol doesn't just consume, it can also become inseparable from the myth of the man himself. Love him or hate him, his drunken defiance carved a place in country history that no one else could replicate. Gary Stewart, known as the king of Honky Tonk, Gary Stewart was one of the most distinctive voices in country music during the 1970s. Born in 1944 in Kentucky, Stewart rose to prominence with hits like She's Actin' Single, I'm Drinking Doubles, and Out of Hand. His soaring tenor, combined with raw emotional lyrics, made him a unique figure in the genre. But while his music often told stories of drinking, heartbreak, and despair, those themes weren't just artistic choices. They mirrored his own alcohol-soaked reality. Stewart's relationship with alcohol was both personal and professional. He lived the life he sang about, often spending nights in bars that inspired his songs. Fans who saw him perform recalled a man who seemed perpetually surrounded by bottles, his stage presence amplified, or sometimes sabotaged, by drinking. In interviews, Stewart admitted that alcohol helped him cope with loneliness and depression, but it also worsened those very struggles. His career, though marked by flashes of brilliance, was hindered by his drinking. Record executives found him difficult to manage, promoters found him unreliable, and audiences sometimes saw him too drunk to perform at his best. Still, many fans embraced the authenticity. Stewart wasn't pretending to live the honky-tonk life. He was drowning in it. Tragedy followed him closely. Stewart's wife, Mary Lou, was his anchor for much of his life. But in 2003, after her sudden death, his drinking spiraled into devastation. Just a month later, Gary Stewart was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Friends and fans alike believed that alcohol and grief had consumed him entirely, leaving him unable to carry on without the partner who had steadied him for so long. Despite the tragic end, Stewart's influence endures. His blend of honky-tonk grit and rock-inspired energy influenced countless artists, and his songs remain staples for those who appreciate the raw edge of 1970s country. Yet his legacy is bittersweet. A man whose music about drinking was brilliant, but whose own drinking ultimately claimed him. Gary Stewart's story epitomizes the destructive cycle of alcohol in country music. It gave him his voice, his stories, and his identity, but in the end, it also took away everything he loved. Fans remember him as a man who lived his lyrics to the bitter end, a honky-tonk king forever haunted by the bottle. Faron Young. Among the legends of classic country, Faron Young earned the nickname the hillbilly heartthrob for his smooth voice and movie star looks. Born in 1932 in Shreveport, Louisiana, Young rose to fame in the 1950s with hits like Hello Walls and Live Fast, Love Hard, Die Young. He became a member of the Grand Ole Opry, starred in films, and even founded Music City News, a key publication in Nashville. But while his public image sparkled, Young's private life was increasingly dominated by alcohol, so much so that he became infamous for being drunk nearly all the time. Faron's drinking started early in his career and only grew worse as fame surrounded him. Whiskey and beer were constant companions, whether he was on stage, in the studio, or at industry events. Friends and colleagues often told stories of his drunken escapades, sometimes funny, sometimes frightening. He could charm an audience one night and explode in anger the next. His reputation for being unpredictable under the influence became as well known in Nashville as his hit songs. Alcohol fueled not only his charm, but also his volatility. Young was notorious for his sharp tongue, often insulting peers, journalists, or even fans after a few drinks. Several of his marriages and relationships collapsed under the weight of his drinking and temper. By the 1970s and 1980s, his behavior had alienated him from many in the music industry, even as fans continued to adore his classic hits. Though his career continued with touring and recording, the bottle always seemed to follow. Younger country stars looked up to him musically, but often kept their distance personally, wary of his reputation when drunk. The very quality that made him magnetic on stage, his boldness, became destructive off stage when alcohol turned it into aggression. Tragically, the years of drinking left him isolated and bitter. On December 10, 1996, Faron Young died by suicide at the age of 64, a devastating end to a career that had once seemed unstoppable. Friends later said that loneliness, declining health, and his ongoing battle with alcohol had pushed him to the breaking point. Today, Faron Young is remembered both as a pioneering star and as a cautionary figure. His songs still play on classic country stations, a reminder of the charm and talent he brought to the genre. But his struggles with alcohol, which shadowed him throughout his life, remain an inseparable part of his story. In many ways, he embodied the double edge of country music's drinking culture: glamorous on stage, destructive behind the curtain.